Thank you all for joining today. Good morning, good evening to everyone, wherever you are. So today is going to be a live broadcast. Specifically, we're going to be focusing on how Casper is an interesting network, how it differentiates from other networks, and talk more about the technology. Quick disclaimer in the beginning: the Casper token sale on CoinList is only eligible for residents in supported jurisdictions, so specifically. People who reside in the US, Canada, and China will not be able to participate in the sale, in addition to some other CoinList unsupported jurisdictions. So without further ado, thank you all for joining. My name is Spencer, and I work in the business operations team here at CoinList. And today we have Mrinal and Medha from the Casper team. So, you guys want to introduce yourself really quick?
Sure. Thanks a bunch, Spencer, for having us on. We're very happy to be here to talk to your users about Casper and the upcoming sale. I'm Medha Parlikar. I'm the CTO and one of the co-founders of Casper Labs. And before doing this, I have about 20 years in enterprise software development experience as a technology leader, where I was leading large enterprise development teams in the delivery of software for customers.
And hey, everyone, you have Mrinal here, CEO and one of the co-founders of the Casper network. Before I introduce myself, just wanted to thank everyone for the unprecedented and historic demand we've seen on the sale. We had no idea that people would be this interested, and we're humbled by it every day, and we'll work extremely hard to ensure that interest is well founded. In terms of my background, I'm a computer scientist, but kind of cut my teeth on Wall Street. Spent 2.5 years at Bain & Company in Boston, 2.5 years at Bain Capital in private equity and LBOs, and worked at a long-only hedge fund for about 5 years. But I've been involved in distributed computing pretty much my entire adult life. I was an open source contributor at BitTorrent way back in 2002 during undergrad, kind of telegraphing my age there. And then, discovered Bitcoin in 2010, started buying it in 2012, became an angel investor in the space, was in the earliest rounds of Ethereum, Blockstack, Basis, Filecoin, a bunch of protocols. And through that, saw that there really was a need for an enterprise-grade product within the industry. And, lo and behold, on Halloween of 2018, decided to partner up with Medha and some others and create one. And now we're a team of over 50 people and close to 100 if you include our advisors. But really happy to be here and talk about the protocol with all of you.
Awesome. Thank you all for the intros. And for the audience, if you have any questions, so the format today is we're going to kind of have some CoinList prepared questions, and it'll be a conversation at the beginning. And then for the latter half of the broadcast, we will be fielding audience questions. So if you have any questions, feel free to throw into the chat and or in the Q&A box down below, and we can field them towards the end. So I guess without further ado, I know Mrinal talked a little bit about why you decided to build a blockchain, and considering there's a lot of different blockchains out there, kind of curious if you can talk a little bit more, or you and Medha can talk a bit more about why you decided to go after this enterprise strategy, and why you think that there is need for this enterprise blockchain play, and kind of how Casper plays into that.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer this question. So when I took a look at the blockchains that were available in the market, around the time 2018, 2019, and as we were building, we were very, very convinced of the CBC Casper research, and we knew we wanted to build a blockchain that brought CBC Casper to life. So that was the first thing, definitely, which is why we named the company Casper Labs right out from the gate. But as we looked more deeply into the space, beyond the scaling and the scalability and the performance trilemma, or the quality trilemma, if you will, in blockchains, we also recognized that there were a lot of missing features in the protocols that we saw out in the space, right? Namely, the ability to manage and govern your on-chain code was really a glaring miss. And so for that reason, we set out to build a blockchain that actually solved a lot of these core problems that businesses really needed a solution for, right? In order to really support customers and kind of take blockchain adoption to the next level, you really have to be able to manage your contracts on chain effectively.
Yeah, and if I could add to that quickly, Spencer, the one thing I would like to draw a distinction is something can be enterprise grade and still be for everyone. It doesn't need to focus only on enterprises. So let's take AWS as an example. Startups use it, three-person startups use it, and also Netflix uses it. So it runs a gamut from a three-person startup to a multi-billion-dollar company. What we're saying is even startups deserve an enterprise grade product such as AWS, and that's really not existing. But a lot of our partners are much smaller companies and startups as well. But we also talk to extremely large companies, and really, I'd say the if I were to be more nuanced, I'd say it's enterprise grade rather than merely enterprise focused.
I think that's right. And the requirements for enterprise are actually not any different than requirements for DeFi protocols, right? DeFi protocols in the space have governance issues, right? And governance is really talks about when does the software get upgraded, who upgrades it, how are protocol changes made, and all of these things have existed in traditional software companies for decades, right? I worked as a quality control manager, and it was my job to decide when the software was upgraded in production. So you work at you work at companies like Amazon. They have a very clear set of gates that every update that goes to the website has to go through. They have an internal governance process for their software. So even when you talk about DeFi protocols, these DeFi protocols, because they're decentralized, it's even more critical that all these governance tools be available on chain, right? And so, we know that DeFi governance is a really hot topic. And so we feel that what we've built with Casper will enable DeFi protocols, startups and enterprise companies alike to use these core features that we think are just really essential whenever you're building any kind of software product.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I think, as you said, all startups and all companies, whether they're enterprise or not, or early stage, all deserve like enterprise grade and the highest TPS, highest capacity. So kind of curious to hear a little bit more about why you decide to use the CBC Casper approach rather than other types of consensus protocols, and how Casper differentiates from, say, ETH2 or a sharding approach or different types of blockchain approaches.
Yeah, absolutely. I can talk about that. So the Highway Protocol, which is a member of the Casper family of protocols, provides much, much higher throughput and flexibility within the protocol, right? Which makes it very, very secure. It's very hard to identify when the next block is going to be produced or who's going to produce the next block. So this provides it a lot of great security features that are missing in a lot of other protocols. And there's no statistical or probabilistic security, right? You have to get 2/3 of the stake to vote on every block, right? So from that perspective, it's very secure. It's, we're not taking some small sampling of the validator set, right? When we talk about getting votes on any given block, right? Getting that stake to actually vote on a block. So from that perspective, it has a very, very good security guarantees. So that we liked that very much. We like the safety properties of CBC Casper. And we recognized when we started our research that we needed a liveness strategy, right? So we retained the services of Dr. Daniel Kane to actually build out a complete protocol based off of the 2017 CBC paper. Now, I've been working with CBC Casper since 2017, right? So it was natural that I would continue that work once we founded Casper Labs. So that's a little bit on the story of, the history of CBC Casper and how we wound up here. But if you want to talk a little bit about ETH 2.0 and what Casper is doing, so the difference is the flavor of CBC Casper that is planned for in Ethereum 2.0 is what's called the Casper Friendly Finality Gadget. Now, this is a safety proof or safety overlay on top of proof of work, right? Proof of work is very live, but it is not as safe, right? So what does safe mean? Safe means is if you can get enough mining power, you can mine an alternate chain and reverse previous decisions. That's what safety is. Casper provides a safety guarantee such that decisions already made cannot be reverted. Like it is impossible to reverse a decision that's already been finalized. So when you overlay the two, you could theoretically include properties proof of work along with properties of proof of stake. And so this is the plan that Vitalik has for ETH 2.0. That's very different than what we are building. What we are building has absolutely no proof of work in it whatsoever.
Got it. That definitely makes sense. And I know one of the really interesting things about Casper is how, you have this like future-proof property to it. Can you talk a little bit more about why Casper is future-proof, like the upgradable smart contracts and whatnot?
Exactly. So we call ourselves the future-proof blockchain because we provide contract authors the ability to maintain and manage their on-chain code. So when you build a smart contract in Casper, you can specify at the time you store that contract whether it is upgradable or not. So we do support immutable contracts because we recognize that for the DeFi space, there is a class of contracts that users would like to have be immutable for some security guarantees. However, for the majority of enterprise, they need an immutable history of transactions for auditing purposes, but they do need to be able to upgrade their on-chain code. So the really amazing thing is that with the Casper protocol, you specify contract package and you can version your contract. You can have version 1, version 2, version 3, and you can kill old versions of your contract. This all happens on chain. And you can also specify who has the rights to make these contract upgrades, right? So you can specify through a weighted accounts permissioning model, which accounts or which combination of accounts have sufficient weights to perform actions on the contract. And we felt this was extremely important from a governance perspective, right? You need to be able to decentralize who's in charge of a contract, and this list needs to change. It can't be immutable, right? So in the event of an upgrade, you can even change the internal state of a contract. So it's not like all of your customers have to process a transaction to migrate themselves from version 1 to version 2. You can actually do that for customers, right? And we're all used to this experience with Web 2. Like, it's our problem if Amazon needs to upgrade their software, or if any like ServiceNow or Salesforce or any of these SaaS products upgrade their software. It's a completely seamless experience for the end user. And we believe the same thing needs to happen with the blockchain, particularly if the blockchain is going to be integrated into existing Web 2 and mobile applications, right? It just makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and just to give some context there and the genesis of why we thought about this. I mean, think about how easy it is to update your iPhone, your Android phone, Windows, Salesforce, etc., and compare that to the current experience on blockchains, and it's diametrically opposite. And I think the upgradability that's inherent to these systems is the reason why they have such high market share and why they've stuck around forever. You compare that to, I grew up in England, and my favorite operating systems were Amiga and Commodore at the time, but neither of them exist today. And really, this is the reason why they don't exist today. Their inability to upgrade in the face of competition from, call it Microsoft Linux, etc., is why they've gone by the wayside. I think we're fairly unique in identifying this upgradability problem pretty much up front. And the whole idea is we don't know what the world looks like in 10 years, and we can't make all the decisions right now. So let's make sure that the protocol itself and the underlying smart contracts on that protocol are upgradable to adjust for a world 10 years from now that could have much faster chips and a whole bunch of use cases that we haven't even imagined today.
If I could add a couple of points to that. So at the consensus layer, the consensus protocol has the ability to speed up and slow down depending on network conditions. This is really important because it enables the protocol to take advantage of future bandwidth improvements, right? So as bandwidth goes up, the protocol will actually speed up. It can speed up to milliseconds if it needs to, right? So the consensus protocol is very efficient and can take advantage of enhancing, improving network conditions. And we saw, even with the internet, content delivery really became a reality once bandwidth went up, right? And I strongly suspect the same thing is going to happen with blockchain. And additionally, when you talk about future proof, when I designed this protocol, my thinking was really around the protocol layer needs to provide capabilities, right? I don't think about the protocol or the platform really as features. It provides capabilities, and these capabilities are what smart contract developers and developers at large will use to build user-facing features and user-facing applications, right? So when we think about the protocol, I like to think about capabilities. You provide the capability to upgrade smart contracts, we provide the capability to have immutable contracts. We provide the capability to do social key recovery, delegation, and on-chain governance. But these are not necessarily features, they're core capabilities of the platform.
That definitely makes sense. And it sounds like, based on this emphasis on capabilities, it's also very contingent on, or not contingent, it's also gives developers a lot of flexibility and like let them design, where to take this protocol and what to build on top of it. Can you talk a little bit about what your strategy and what your approach is in terms of developer adoption and how you're thinking about that and like competing in that space?
Yeah, definitely. So we are big fans of decentralization, right? We really believe, I'm a libertarian at heart, and I really want to build a system that is very egalitarian, right? And Mrinal shares the sentiment. This is why we increased the allocation for the sale, lowered some of the caps, and made it more accessible based on the overwhelming support, which, by the way, thank you so much for, right? And similarly with developer incentives, we didn't want to be a central point or a controlling point for developer adoption. So we basically gave a very large grant to a developer DAO. And this is owned by developers, built by developers for developers, right? And so they will have a grant system where you can, if you're a developer, you can go register to be an associate. You can build up reputation in the developer DAO and vote on grants and participate as fully as you like. And this is a separate entity. It's a not-for-profit Swiss foundation that is basically going to be responsible for improving decentralization, right? So we're very clear that the Casper grants are not exclusively for Casper. Like, according to their articles of incorporation, they have to use the grants to basically further the goals of decentralization more broadly, right? Casper is one of the protocols that they'll support, but they'll support many protocols in the end.
Yeah, and on the other side, on the enterprise side, the only for-profit entity we have is really just a consulting and services business. So, if there's a large enterprise that needs help and have their hands held to figure out how to, build a certain application, we're there to help with that. But, in terms of the actual network itself, this is completely, we don't own it. It's all run by nonprofits, and the sale is being done out of a nonprofit. And we just want to make sure that the network's as decentralized as we possibly can get it.
Now, and while we're on that topic, can you talk a little bit about the difference between Casper Labs and the Casper Association, and like how did the two play together? I know you talked a little bit about how Casper Labs is more of a consulting shop, and like if you can elaborate a little bit more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Casper Association is a nonprofit in Switzerland, and they have all the tokens. Basically, all the tokens, this token sale, the previous token sales, like everything's done out of a nonprofit association. Casper Labs, the parent company, the for-profit company where we raised our Series A, is really a software development shop. So task one was birth and build the Casper network, which will finish in March. And of course, as big fans of the network, we are going to continue work on it and be open source developers there, because that helps the other side of the business. Where we earn money there is really on consulting and services to large enterprise. Think of it like a Red Hat model, right? Linux is free. Linux is moderated by a completely autonomous community. But if you want, a specific Linux installation for yourself, you can go to Red Hat and get their services anytime. And it's the same thing here. And again, all of this is completely open source. We're big believers in free open source software. But if people need their handheld and want a specific type of installation, we're here to help. And so, feel free to reach out to us if there's something you're looking to build that's fairly complex and you don't know how to get started, we can help.
Awesome. And, while we're on that topic as well, can you talk a little bit more about kind of the existing partnerships and like who's already building on top of the Casper network? Like, what are some of the use cases? They're on the CoinList page, for example, we talked a little bit about IBWE, like the patent registering on Casper network. Can you talk a little bit more about other things that other activities that you're seeing on top of the Casper network at this time?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've signed over a dozen, maybe 20 MOUs with large enterprise partners, and we have a pipeline of many, many dozens. Now, I can't name names for two reasons. One, we make announcements after we've started, after we've actually finished the first version of the build. So when we made the IPv announcement, for example, phase one was already built. So we weren't talking about something we were going to do, but something we've already done. and where it's going next. So we tend to wait as long as we can. And two, we have to respect that the enterprises want to announce it at their own pace. But let me give you examples of like very, very specific use cases and things we're working on without naming names. So there's a multi-billion-dollar supply chain management company out there that does supply chain for the aerospace and medical device industries. As you can imagine, a faulty or counterfeit part within those supply chains can have life-altering or life-ending consequences. And so as a result, you can imagine there's a lot of manual overhead to ensure authenticity of these underlying parts. Now, if you have a blockchain and an immutable ledger that's storing all of this, fraud detection and fault detection has now increased manifold and could save tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars over time processing all of these transactions. So that's something we're working with, and we're extending the supply chain concept to many things, like, for example, track and trace of commodities, valuable commodities like gold and diamonds, track and trace of port systems around the world. We're in touch with, actually not in touch, already signed an MOU, but we'll be announcing the deal soon, with a very large and well-known government to do things like their port system, et cetera, on the supply chain side. And then the other interesting area is track and trace, similar to what we're doing with IPv, but you could extend that concept outside of patents, right? You could do this for movies and music, for example, and how royalties get paid on those systems. You could also do this for credentialing, meaning people's resumes, where they got their degrees from, etc. And speaking of the credentialing system, just to talk about a specific feature here that allows things like this to happen on our blockchain and not others. So think about blockchains today. Sender always pays the underlying gas fee. And I don't know why this model exists. There are lots of situations where you don't want this to happen. Let me give you a very specific example. You want to have a resume credentialing system that's on an immutable ledger. And you want Harvard University to, once they're pinged, basically say, yes, this person attended the university. They're already not likely to do this, right? People aren't going to change their business models to adopt the technology. It's got to be the other way. But they're definitely not going to do it if, in addition to that, they have to pay the underlying transaction fee to get that information across to you. So in this case, it might make so much more sense for the receiver to pay the underlying transaction fee or also include a reward for the sender to do it. And that kind of flexibility in payment code doesn't exist on other blockchains, but on our system, sender can pay, receiver can pay, owner of the dApp can front the cost. We've basically made payments Turing complete, which allows a lot of these use cases to exist, which you can't really do on other blockchains because of these UX limitations. Just to add, an overarching comment, our view has been from the beginning that businesses are not going to change their business processes to enable a technology. A technology needs to fit with their business processes, and you need to give people the capabilities and tools to make sure that they're augmenting their business as opposed to completely changing it. And that's really important to understand. It's something AWS understood, it's something Azure understood, and why they've become, what they are today. Hope that answered the question. Medha, anything to add?
Oh, you broke up there, Mrinal, you're muted. Did you call on me? Yeah, if we want to speak a little bit about enterprise adoptions, we believe that the Casper blockchain will be used as a part of a larger application architecture, right? As Mrinal indicated, these companies have spent 20, 30 years sometimes building up their customer base, building up their software. They are simply not going to re-implement everything to make it work with blockchain. They're just not going to do that, right? They're going to dip their toe in the water. They're going to take a small piece of their application architecture and find a use case for blockchain that will either reduce their risk or increase their revenue. They're very specific about these things. And so what we've built is the capability for these smart contracts to be tested and delivered along with existing software development tooling, right? So those of you that are familiar with Ethereum, you're familiar with Truffle and Ganache, right? And you're probably familiar in the Ethereum ecosystem. There's a lot of tooling around building and testing your smart contracts. Well, the reason for this is because you can't do it with the EVM, right? There isn't a way for you to easily just run the EVM by itself and test your contract. Well, we needed that, right? We're blockchain for the builders. And so we built this tool for ourselves. So when we were developing smart contracts, our developers realized that there wasn't any way to test the smart contract. So we actually built a Casper Runtime that allows you to run the global state, the actual virtual machine of Casper, right there on your desktop while you're building your smart contract. So what does that mean? You don't need truffle and ganache, right? If you're working in Rust, you use a Rust IDE like Sea Lion. You set up your smart contract using Cargo Casper, and it sets up a test framework for you, right? So you get your empty contract and the empty test that proves that the contract is correctly structured because it runs it right there in your IDE. So you don't need a node. You don't need a node for development. You can create unit tests, and then you can send this entire thing to all of these continuous integration tooling that GitHub already has, like Drone, Jenkins, Travis, right? There's an entire segment of development operations that really requires that contracts be delivered this way. So all of that huge software that you see at Salesforce and ServiceNow or HubSpot or any of these applications, they all go through what we call integration pipelines. And you can't take a piece of your core architecture that's going to be immutable transactions and not have it go through this pipeline. It's absolutely critical. And every enterprise we've spoken to, every development shop we've spoken to, they almost fall out of their chair when we tell them, guess what? Basically our VM integrates directly into your CI/CD pipeline. And the only way we could do this is if we built our own virtual machine, right? So I'm just embellishing here, but this is a very, very important feature in Casper that really makes it built for the builders.
That makes sense. And we talked a little bit about, the builders, the developers, kind of the different partners building on top of Casper. Kind of curious to talk a little bit about the validators. Like, what is your thinking, or how do you think about, getting more validators onboarded? Like, how many validators do you think will be there on day one? And like, what are you doing to help validators come onto the network and making your network more secure?
Yeah, I can answer that. So at launch, the first 60 days, the network will be very quiet, right? There'll be very few transactions because we've got these extensive lockups in place, right? So for the first 60 days, we anticipate we'll have about 60 validators that will be running the nodes. And after the CoinList freely token unlocks in May, we anticipate that we'll see more validators join the network. Our goal is to, validators will rotate on the Casper protocol every 30 minutes through a first price auction that runs on chain. So delegators, people that are staking their token, can select a validator of their choice and stake to that validator. And the really cool thing is that delegator weight and validator weight is considered exactly the same. So what that means is the delegators have a real seat at the table and a strong incentive to select validators that are going to make it into the auction set, right? High quality validators are going to give them great returns. And we believe that securing a protocol through economics versus tightly constraining the function of the protocol is the way to go, right? So we provide a lot of support in our Discord, hands-on. We've got support folks that are there to help validators on board with the protocol and the software. And we've made it very easy for them to use. And we built monitoring tools, right? Because again, our own development operations and site reliability engineers needed a way to monitor the protocol. So there's full monitoring capability that integrates with any monitoring system. So if you're a node operator and you need to monitor the node, we have a whole metrics dashboard that you can use, and logging and all of the things that are important in making sure the protocol stays up and is secure.
And if I could just add one point, just in case this wasn't abundantly clear, the entire system is fully open and permissionless. Everything happens algorithmically. There is no gate. No one decides who's the validator set. This is all done in protocol. It's completely open and permissionless. So tomorrow, if someone wants to spin up their own hardware and join the network, just like Bitcoin or Ethereum, have at it, get on it as soon as you want. And this is a very conscious decision we made. There is no DPoS, there's no permissioning, there's no council, all algorithmic.
That makes sense. And yeah, thank you for your descriptions and like your explanations of how the protocol works. Let's open it up to some audience questions. One question that I saw is, is Casper active in the DeFi market? Like, are you thinking about getting into that play? What's the strategy there?
Yes. So yes, the main answer is yes, but let me be more specific there. One, The protocol is not launched, but we've been approached by basically most of these swaps and most of these systems. But these application developers will develop these applications themselves. I think we've given them a capability set, and especially on-chain governance that's a level above what they're dealing with right now. So they're really, really happy to build on the system. But let me talk about where DeFi needs to get. DeFi, where it is right now, just yield farms and stuff like that, it's very small. This is not, the returns are unsustainable. It's not going to be like this forever. And what we really need is ways to algorithmize and formalize real world assets like debt, mortgages, equities, etc. And that's where we're doing a lot of research and doing a big push. So, if you go to Actus, for example, there is a clearly defined set of standards for these financial assets. And really, if you want to disrupt core banking and real world use of decentralized finance, this level of standardization across asset classes is something that needs to happen. That's a core area of research focus for us going forward. But to answer, yes, very interested in the space, already speaking to, there will be something similar to like a Polka starter. There'll be something similar to Uniswap. All of that is going to be built.
Makes sense. And yeah, for the audience, if you have any questions, feel free to toss it into the chat again and to toss it in the Q&A box. And let's try to keep the questions focused around Casper network and the technology rather than kind of the sale whatnot. I'll kind of run through some of the sale items towards the end of the broadcast. So another question that was brought up was, how can you talk a little bit more about the backers and the overall ecosystem in terms of the people who audited Casper, the people who are helping with the staking and whatnot, so a bit more than kind of the people who are building on top of it.
Absolutely. So with respect to the audits, we went through a very successful audit with Trail of Bits for the consensus protocol and the software. So they reviewed the mathematical paper and looked, verified the proofs in the math. And then they matched that against our actual code implementation to provide guarantees that the code, in fact, does implement that paper, right? And we're very pleased that we exited the security audit with no findings whatsoever. There was a couple of informational findings. We're very proud that compared to the other layer ones out there, we have published our security report transparently. So you can go to GitHub Trail of Bits publications, and you can see our report from Trail of Bits, published by Trail of Bits. And you can see that there were no findings whatsoever in the report. So we're very proud of that. We're also working with QuantStamp right now to get all of our smart contracts audited, as well as the virtual machine. That'll be a multi-month effort to get that audit done. But again, we're quite confident that we will exit that audit very cleanly as well.
Awesome. And another question I see in the audience is, can you talk a little bit more about that token release and the Genesis block breakdown and kind of what was the thinking behind the design of that?
Yeah, I can handle this. So to be honest, one of the most common questions we get actually is, why did you pick 10 billion tokens? And to be honest, there was no reason. We just picked a random number. 10 billion happens to be 10 to the power 10, which we thought looks kind of cool. That was really the only reason. But let's talk about the breakdown. So really, most of it is for the community, right? So we had 2 validator sales, which is about 30% of the network. We thought that's around the right amount, because that's your security at launch. And just so you know, this was not a private token sale. This was a validator sale. And people need to understand what that means. That means everyone getting involved in that sale has the obligation and compulsion to ensure that every single one of those tokens is staked at Genesis. So this is not a typical token sale. This was purely done for the security of the underlying network. And that's a huge distinction here. We didn't really do a private token sale at all. It is just, these are the people who will set up the Genesis block. And this is why the underlying network will have security from day one. And then, of course, there's another 16% that's going out in the CoinList public offering. And we feel, we're really happy with the unprecedented demand, we increased that from 10 to 16 and lowered caps to make sure as many people can get in as possible. And then we've set aside the Casper Association has set aside a full 16% for developer grants. And then the nonprofit Casper Association still retains another 14%. What exactly that grant program looks like is TBD. But as mentioned, it's a nonprofit association, so the only incentive there is to do what's best for the network. And then very small team allocation of 8%. We looked at every single protocol out there and said, we want to make sure it's smaller. Advisors have about 6%. And then, the holding company, which is the software company, retains 10%. But the idea here is that is going to be perma-staked. It's really only there to be staked on the network. And then on the team token side, another question we get a lot is what's the unlock schedule? It takes 27 months for the entire team allocation to unlock. So longer than any of the tranches on the CoinList sale.
And kind of what are you planning to use the sale proceeds for? That's another question that I saw in the Q&A boxes.
We have a very large engineering team of our entire team's 50 people. It's literally pay people salaries. That's it. There's nothing else. There's no share buyback or anything or token buyback. It's literally to pay salaries. When you have a high quality team with dozens and dozens of people, it gets expensive.
That definitely makes sense. Running these companies is not a cheap task. And I guess another question that's kind of top of mind for a lot of people is high network fees for other chains right now. Kind of how do you intend to manage your network fees for people who are using applications on top of the Casper network, and also just people who are doing things on top of it generally?
So we have a very interesting model here, right? One of the core problems that I identified when we were building out the product is that businesses, and any business, it doesn't matter if it's a DeFi protocol, end user, whatever, you need to be able to predict your infrastructure costs. You need to have some guarantees around budget, right? It simply is not feasible to have this wildly fluctuating fee structure, right? So what we did is we recognized that the gas model is a solid model. There are definitely many, many attack vectors if you do not use a gas model in a Turing complete system like we have with smart contracts, because there are things that are just possible, right? Like infinite loops and other terrible things that can be done within a smart contract. So you need a gas model, right? We recognize that the gas model is elegant and it works really, really well. That being said, when you get to a place where there's a lot of network congestion, you do run into challenges with users being able to bid up the cost of gas, and you wind up where Ethereum is today. And so we recognize that. The ultimate solution for this is scalability, right? And the Casper protocol will have more throughput than Ethereum does today. The second option we came up with is what we call a gas futures market. So blocks within the Casper protocol. There's a couple things that it's technical details, so I'll dive in a little bit here. Blocks in Casper protocol are finalized first and then run. So the validators do not run transactions before including them in a block. They select the transactions and propose a block based on the number of transactions and the type of transaction it is. So you can either have WebAssembly-based transactions or token transfers, basically the two categories of transactions today. So what this enables us to do is reserve space in a block. So we've built this into basically the block proposer architecture where space is reserved in a block. Now, the cool thing is we can then tokenize this space. And so basically what will happen is we'll create a block, basically a gas futures market that enables businesses to purchase space and reserve space in blocks up to 6 months in advance. And so by tokenizing the space, they can get some guarantees around the price, right? They can budget for their utilization 6 months in advance and buy that block space up. And the validators have to adhere to this, or they do not get the transaction fees associated with those tokenized blocks.
And another question I saw is, what do you foresee as the biggest challenge for the next year after the Casper network launches?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to definitely keeping up with all the demand, right? We've promised glove service, and we want to support all the customers that are coming to us so they have an easy and delightful onboarding experience. We're still definitely building out the smart contract ecosystem, clients, SDKs. So there's a lot of work, right? There's a lot of languages that compile to WebAssembly. So there's a lot of do there. So, I mean, we're hiring people as fast as we can hire them, but I think the big challenge is really going to be meeting the demand.
Yeah, I agree. The biggest problem we have is the amount of enterprise interest is too much for us to handle right now. And while we're hiring aggressively, my biggest concern is that we're not going to be able to do it fast enough. But I think our team is likely to double in size over the next year.
Awesome. I guess it's a good problem to be having. And kind of on the topic of overwhelming demand, can you speak a little bit about the recent announcement of changing some of the sale parameters to meet that unprecedented demand?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, first, let's start with the initial parameters that we put out were based on, we've looked at some of the historical sales and whatever public data we could find. And we're just like, okay, how do we make sure that, we set this up in a way that everyone who wants to participate can participate and is successful. Now, we didn't know that we'd be, many multiples higher than the largest CoinList sale to date. Like, we didn't know we'd cross over 100,000 unique registrants. We absolutely didn't expect that. And as a result, we're huge decentralists and decentralization purists. We wanted to make sure we changed things such that more people can participate and therefore lend more security to the network and have, get as decentralized as possible on day one. So we did two things. One is we increased the total size of the sale by 60%. Meaning we went from 10% to 16% of total supply. Essentially, we had pre-announced that in all three options, we did have the option to increase them, and we took all the increases. And second, we lowered the caps a bit. And hopefully this will ensure that most people who want to participate are able to participate. But really, that was the thinking behind it. The demand exceeded everyone's expectations, and we just wanted to make sure as many people as possible could get it.
Awesome. And kind of to add to that, there are some audience questions about whether or not CoinList will be ready for that demand. So I think I can answer that quickly. So, CoinList definitely is doing everything we can to make sure that we're ready for that server load on the day of the sale. So we're doing a few things. First is we are using a queue system. So for those of you who are interested, I can toss a link in the chat later, which is basically like a queuing system that tracks the amount of throughput of users coming onto the platform. And then, it's rate limited. If there's like way too many people coming in at once, then we start putting people in a queue. And then, as people's turns come, they are able to enter the website. So, that does two things. One is it, makes sure that the website is always in a place where it has the capacity to keep getting people in. The second thing is it also is able to block out bots. And on the topic of bots, please, if anyone is planning on using bots, please note that the moment that we catch you using a bot, we will be canceling your purchase entirely, and we will be blacklisting you and banning you from the platform. So please do not use bots. I think it makes the experience bad for every single person involved in the sale, and also does not benefit you in any way or in shape or form. So that's the first thing that we're doing. The second thing we're doing is also just kind of beefing up our infrastructure, getting more servers, making sure that we are monitoring the registration numbers every single day, and we're having active discussions internally to make sure that the site is live and does not crash on the day of the sale. But yeah, please, I want to emphasize again that please do not use bots. If we do find that you're using a bot, we will be blacklisting you instantly and canceling all of your purchases. And I guess another question that I saw is, are you planning for cross-chain compatibility, and what was your thinking there as well?
So we did something really interesting here, right? And if you think about what we said earlier around capabilities are extremely important, right? So the core architecture of the virtual machine enables the support of any kind of key type. So right now we have implemented in our clients Ethereum 256 SEC P26K1 keys, as well as our ED2519 keys natively within the protocol. So what this means is if you want to build any kind of bridges or cross-chain compatibility, you don't need to create two sets of keys. The keys will work absolutely seamlessly. And if you want to add another key type, for example, if we want to add secure enclave, this is a client implementation. So there's no protocol fork or protocol upgrade needed to add a new key type. The basically virtual machine doesn't really care what kind of key you're using, what kind of key type you're using specifically, right? So it's a client side change. So you can implement a client that uses Cosmos keys. I don't know what Cosmos uses, or Polkadot keys. I don't know what they use, but it'll just work, right? So this again goes to capabilities to enable developers to build what they want to build for their customers.
And the developer DAO, that's putting out the grants for developers. All these bridges are a core part of their or a core priority for them. And so, we've built the capability to make this easier than it is with any other chain, but we expect a lot of this is going to be community.
That definitely makes sense. And so I guess kind of how are you thinking about the other projects in that layer one space right now? And, we talked a little bit about the approach from Casper and how it differentiates the other ones. What do you think is going to be the biggest competition point moving forward for the next few years?
I think Ethereum is always going to be the biggest competition, right? Going forward. Although I don't necessarily love the word competition, only because, and I'll tell you why. This industry is so underpenetrated. I don't think it's even gotten to a competitive phase. If you think about it, it's like a circular firing squad. We're all shooting at each other, but really, it's the real world is kind of ignoring this, right? It's like we're in our own little bubble here. The technology, blockchain technology, is less than 1% penetrated. So we've not even reached that. But in terms of overall developer interest, size of community, number of holders, which we think is really, really important, and also why we make changes, given the demand, Ethereum is way out ahead, right? They have the most adoption, they have the most developers building on it. So they will always be at least for the foreseeable future, the largest, 800-pound gorilla. We've obviously built a lot of things, taking us closer to where they want to be with ETH 3.0, and we're implementing it right now, plus a lot of enterprise features, and and a slightly different business model where we can handhold enterprises and onboard them. But yeah, to answer the question, I think Ethereum, pretty much. Meta, what do you think?
Yeah, I think I mirror what Mrinal said, right? Like in terms of the big competitor, it's obviously Ethereum, but we're not really going after Ethereum developers, right? What we've built actually is much, much more suited to Web 2 developers. And like I indicated before, we see blockchain as a part of a larger application architecture. That's very than Ethereum's philosophy around it, right? We haven't heard that a lot coming from Ethereum. So we believe that like a very small component of an existing application architecture will be targeted for use, for moving to the blockchain, because it provides a very specific value proposition. And I've seen this recurring theme with all of the companies that we've spoken with, right? And so our architecture, right, the way smart contracts are built and tested will integrate very, very well with that, including the workflow. It's just not a Web3 workflow. It's a Web 2 workflow, right? And so the interesting thing I've actually found is that when Web3 developers kind of come to Casper, the first thing they do is they spin up a node. I'm like, you don't need to spin up a node. And they kind of look at me like, what? I'm like, you don't need to spin up a node. You just build it in an IDE, right? And so that like the IDE support for Solidity is just coming on the scene now. IDE support for Rust, C++, Java has been there for 20 years, right? So it's very different. It's like, so we're going after a different class of developers completely. That's my opinion. Yeah.
And there's a lot of them. There's a lot of them. This industry is so underpenetrated. There's maybe 20,000 Solidity developers out there, but you take like C, C++, Java, Rust, 30 million. And so like I said, I mean, I think the industry sometimes is in a little bit of a bubble. We're all, chasing the same people. We're just going after different people. We're like,
Yeah, and I mean,
there's
to
a
actually,
bigger world out there.
yeah, and to actually expound upon this, when I really distill down why, like if you ask why have businesses not adopted public blockchain infrastructure, and it really boils down to risk. Public blockchain infrastructure has been extremely risky for businesses to adopt, right? You can't upgrade your contracts. You got to hire the one unicorn Solidity developer, and if he leaves, you're really in trouble. You can't build and test your contracts, so you don't know if there's going to be a bug. If the protocol forks, you have no guarantees about how your contract's going to build, or you have two versions of your contract. Like, these are real problems for business. They just went private. They're like, we're just private because on the private blockchain, we control everything, right? And so like, even with the private blockchain, they're still struggling with a lot of these problems, right? And so our architecture actually solves all that. If you can write contracts in any language, guess what? You don't have the Solidity guy coming to you and saying, I want $50,000 more, or I'm walking, right? That's a real problem for businesses. You don't have to worry about trying to recruit and hire that top talent. Your existing guys that are on your team, they can learn assembly script. They can actually also learn about with Rust, with C++, and they can test all their contracts. So you don't have that fear of continuity that you got one guy in the organization is the only one that knows how the smart contract works, right? This is like, as the director of engineering in a real company, in a big company, these are problems I had to deal with every single day, right? I call it the bus factor, right? What's the bus factor for core components of my code? That this guy gets up and walks out tomorrow, am I going to be able to support my customer and provide value to the business?
Awesome. And, in the interest of time, we have around 5 minutes or so left. So if community members want to learn more about Casper and what you do, where you're working on, new initiatives, like what can they do?
Yeah, so there's several venues. I think they should follow if you go to casperlabs.io, we have a blog there, or go to casper.network. We have a blog. We're pretty active. We put something out every few days. So everything we're working on, anytime an audit comes out, it will be put there. And if we have a new feature, we try to be as transparent as possible. The other places, we have a Telegram channel, all accessible from our website. Myself, Medha, lots of members of the team are in there. I wouldn't say all the time, but now and then. We do have a blockchain to build as well, but we try to answer questions, and we ask our moderators to make sure that if they're pressing questions that come up. And if you want to talk to the dev team and have a more in-depth technical discussion, Discord is the right venue. And then of course the DevDAO. The DevDAO have their own channel, they have their own website. If you guys want to grant, if you guys want to participate in the community and be part of building and maintaining both the protocol, but also new cool applications on top of it, definitely reach out to them. That's the single largest tranche of supply out there, literally. And so that's really just for the community and for developers. So feel free to reach out to them as well. All links are on our website.
Awesome. And given that we have a little bit of time left, I'll kind of talk a little bit about the process of the sale. So for those of you who haven't registered for the sale, you can register by going to coinlist.co/Casper. And there are the 3 different options. Each different option has different terms as shown on the website and different sign-up flows. So if you want to participate in a specific option, you need to go through that specific flow. You can combine the different options and whatnot. So you can do options 1 and 3, 1 and 2, or just 1, or whatever you would like. And kind of the thinking. So given the overwhelming demand, we unfortunately aren't able to guarantee that everyone is able to get in. But we're definitely doing everything we can to make sure that we can get as many people in as possible for the sale. And for one thing to note is that for people who are participating in option 2, given that we are going to have to go through Swiss compliance as well, you will need to upload a proof of residence documentation. And then if your purchase is successful at the end, we will be asking you for a source of funds. You can find all the specific details about what is a valid document on the Casper landing page on CoinList. So there's that. And then If you have any questions or support issues, please email team@coinlist.co. Our support team will do our best to answer your questions and help you out there. So yeah, with the last 4 minutes or so, kind of wanted to leave some time for Mrinal and Medha to, is there something we didn't talk about that you really want to talk about or like emphasize?
I'll go first, and I'll let Medha close us out. Nothing particular. Just wanted to thank CoinList for being wonderful partners here. I know I speak for the team when I say we've thoroughly enjoyed working with the team, and thanks for the flexibility. In in light of the overwhelming demand, we really love that we could partner with you guys and do what's best for our community. Really appreciate that, and I hope the community realizes that both of us in concert. It was great to have CoinList as partners to be able to do that. And then I just want to thank the community and everyone for their interest. We couldn't build something like this if there wasn't the interest in it. This is an extremely ambitious project that we've tried to put together. And I really think the best is yet to come. Once a mainnet launches, it's your network. It's not our network at all anymore. And I can't wait for that day. And we will continue, to help decentralize and build capabilities on the network. And thanks for all your support. And we're going to do our best not to let you down.
Yeah, I want to really, emphasize and echo what Mrinal says. We're very humbled and grateful to all of you for your trust and interest and support. And we're committed to doing our very best to build out a fantastic protocol that businesses can build, right? Your success is our success, right? That's the way we look at it, is that we want everyone that uses this protocol to experience great prosperity and success in their life, right? And that's why we built a protocol of capabilities. We wanted capabilities for the community to run the protocol. We provided capabilities for smart contract developers to build real businesses using the protocol, and for enterprises to provide great features for users using the protocol. That was the intention. And so we're very committed to being here, staying the course, and working really hard so this protocol can grow and evolve with your feedback.
Awesome. Yeah, likewise here at CoinList, we are very shocked and very grateful and humbled by the overwhelming demand here. And thank you all for everyone for tuning in today. And thank you for Medha and Mrinal for your time. Your team has been extremely good partners, and we really admire and respect how much you care about the decentralization aspect and wanting to get more community members into the sale and whatnot. I think that is a very good spirit. And we also very much believe in decentralization. We really believe that, we want to make community be the emphasis for all of these networks and whatnot. So for those of you who have any questions or didn't, might have missed some parts of the broadcast, this broadcast will be uploaded to YouTube afterwards, hopefully today or tomorrow, and you can kind of revisit that. If you also registered for the sale, I will be sending out an email to all of you to kind of share the latest information of the structural changes that we made recently, and in addition to the link to this webinar. Yeah, thank you all for your tuning in, and thank you again, Mrinal and Medha.
Thank you, Spencer. Thanks, everyone. Cheers.
Thanks, Spencer. Bye-bye. Cheers.
Have a good one, everyone. Bye.